Greetings, everyone. I'm Mar, and once again, this is my opinion. As you can tell from the title up there, this video is going to be about my thoughts on the recent Vice Chris Benoit Dark Side of the Ring documentary, their two-parter, and I'm also going to give some of my thoughts on the whole Benoit situation and what I remember from when that whole happened. Start things off. This two-parter is the first time I've actually watched any of these Dark Side of the Ring episodes. I know. First season I wanted to watch it, then I got too far behind and I'm like, screw it, I'll wait. And with those ones, just like some of these episodes, it just seems like them doing documentaries out of stuff that have been done, time and time again, Fabulous Moolah, among others. Which that one I do want to see, just see how they tackle the controversial aspect of her. See what some of the people that knew her say about it. I know Cornette's talked about her before. And they also talked about her on Something to Wrestle with Bruce Pritchard. Now, when season 2 was announced, I'm like, I wonder what's going to happen. When they said they were going to do one on Benoit, I'm like, all right, this is one I got to see. I mean, the Benoit murder-suicide case has been done to death. But who knows? They might pull up some more information, or we might get some information we haven't been told. And when it comes to that second part, I was right. Because in this two-parter, they did mention some information that I did not know. Now, some people might ask, why a two-parter? Well, the first part sets the stage for what went down that day. Talks about Benoit's relationship with Eddie, their career path. They do touch on Eddie's drug issues, his death. And one thing they mentioned about Eddie's death I did not know was that he was still alive when Chavo found him. The way that they'd always talked about it for years, Chavo going into the room and find him on the floor, I always assumed Eddie was deceased at that point, but no, Eddie was still alive, and Chavo was holding him, and Eddie passed away in his arms, which that hit me right here when I heard that, because I can kind of understand how that would make Chavo feel just a little bit. The reason I say that is when my grandfather passed away, he was on hospice and he was here in the house. We had the nurse coming over to check on him. I think if I remember right, it was a weekly thing. Well, they had checked on him briefly, and there he was all right. Coming to the kitchen, talk with my grandmother. They go back to check him. The nurse is like, wait a minute. And he was gone. He just slipped away like that. So, just from how surreal that is, I can kind of understand how Chavo must be feeling. It's not the entire same feeling, but I can at least understand how Chavo must have felt. But his situation, a lot more pain. And he's the one that actually told Benoit about it. And Benoit, when he told him, he broke down. And another comparison I'm going to make to my grandfather right here. Benoit, like my grandfather, was someone that kept it inside, kept his emotions inside. If he liked you, you would know. He probably would do things for you. I'm basing this based on how they talk about Benoit in this documentary, obviously, where they say he kept everything to the chest. But when Eddie died, all those walls about how he kept everything bottled inside came crashing down, and he broke down. I mean, they talk about the way he held Eddie's body. Jericho mentioned at the funeral he was crying into his shoulder to where the tears went through. It broke him. The term bromance fits these two perfectly, because they were friends. They were meant to be friends, and they really did care about each other and depended on each other. I don't know if it was more depending more on the other, but definitely at this point in his life, Benoit definitely depended on Eddie, and his death shattered him. Personally, I think, and based on some of the words in this documentary, I'm not alone in this, but Eddie's death is the starting point of Benoit spiraling down. And at the end of this video, I will mention how I think it is all. Well, being shattered, they did give Benoit a diary to, write his thoughts in, like he's writing to Eddie, and they don't really read any excerpts from it, which I think is kind of a shame, but they probably did it out of respect for Benoit. But I think it'd be interesting to read the diary just to see how his mental state went from when he was given the diary to the events. Because who knows, maybe he wrote something in there. But if he wrote something in there, it was probably like before the incident, and then anything afterwards is probably just loosey-goosey. It's the only thing they mentioned that he wrote or that he left that was found that he wrote around that time was a very generalized suicide note they found in a Bible. They this during this they also mentioned his relationship with Nancy, his wife, how they met when they both worked for WCW. I think a lot of wrestling fans know that angle. Benoit versus Sullivan, one man stealing another man's wife. And the joke about that is that Kevin Sullivan, being one of the bookers for WCW at that time, essentially booked his own divorce. And for Nancy, that would have been her second divorce. She went with Benoit. One thing they mentioned that I did not know, I've never even heard any inklings about this, was that apparently Kevin Sullivan was rough with Nancy a couple times. Now, since Kevin does not participate in this documentary, we don't get to hear his side of the story, but he did say he denies it. Now, make of that what you will. Maybe he just didn't want to talk about the Benoit situation again, because it seems that's one of the things they always want to talk with him about in the interviews they've done since the events, especially considering the conspiracy theories, which they didn't really touch on those, which I can see why, because those Kevin Sullivan conspiracy theories are, if you want to find an example of conspiracy theories that are basically taking things way too far just to trying to find an explanation other than the obvious, it's the Kevin Sullivan one. It's like, really? You love Benoit so much that you want to find any reason to say he's not the one that committed the murders? And you're going to bring Kevin into the mix? Congratulations. You're going to the White Room with the people in the white coats. You're going to sit there forever, eating jello and watching Geraldo. Got to be in a place like that to watch Geraldo in the first place. Well, now what I find interesting about that is that Nancy went from one husband that allegedly abused her to another husband who down the road got physical with her a couple times. The incident they mention is hit Chris punching out a window, then Nancy leaving him, and oddly enough, it was her sister Sandra who was the one that intervened eventually after she talked with Chris on the phone and was the one that got them back together. And she even muses maybe it wasn't the best idea, but who knows? If she hadn't done that, maybe Benoit would have just ended up committing suicide himself. Maybe it would have made things worse. Maybe it would have been one of those going posto situations. Those two words are the two most dangerous words to think of when you're thinking about certain things. What if? Sometimes it's good to speculate on it, like when it comes to storytelling. Other times, usually when it comes to historical events, especially ones involving you, they are the two worst words. Trust me, I'm not going to get into any specifics here, but those are two words that a lot of times I do mull over. One important detail about the murders that I did not know, I don't even think I remember hearing about this when they were doing all the news coverage, which is an aside. The only station I watched news coverage of was HLN, which of course is the channel that Miss Nancy Disgrace used to be on. And I did see some of her coverage, which is how I know about the infamous list. I just didn't really pay her too much attention. I'm like, really? This was when I was semi-smart, to use a wrestling term. It's not like how I am now. If I were to watch this and go, really? Really? Back then, I'm like, all right. But the one thing that really caught my attention was the list that she brought up, and of course, having Owen Hart on that list. Really? You're going to put a man who fell to his death on a list of wrestlers that died young and try to connect them all to steroid use? Which I'll get to that in a little bit, the whole steroid controversy. But I don't remember them mentioning anything involving the time frame of the murders other than it just being speculation. But what they mentioned in this documentary was that Benoit was alone in the house with the bodies of his wife and son for a couple days before he took his life. Because here's the time frame that they lay out in the documentary. He got into the argument with Nancy that Friday evening and killed her. He killed Daniel sometime the next day. They mentioned the morning. And then he didn't kill himself until Sunday. Think about that. And based on his conversations with Chavo and the time frame based on decomposition, when he had that one chuck with Chavo that everyone brings up, where Chavo even sensed he was a bit off, and then of course later he sent the text, the dogs are on the side. That one, we all kind of figure that, oh yeah, by that point he had done, and then that was probably right before he offed himself. Nope, he still went to bed, woke up, did some stuff, and then killed himself after he sent those messages. The conversation, though, that he had with Chavo, that must have been right after he killed Daniel, whether literally right after or a couple hours after or when he was still contemplating. It's one of those things that I really wish Benoit had actually left some writings other than that one thing in the Bible, so we at least know what he was thinking, or even like do a little video thing saying what happened, because it just leaves a lot of mystery. And with that, I can kind of understand why the whole Sullivan conspiracy angle started, but at the same time, like I said, it's like reaching. It's just the one thing about this is that we'll never know 100% for certain what happened. Other than based on past events, it did start with an argument. And from what we do know that is confirmed earlier in that afternoon, Chris and Daniel were having a barbecue and it was good. But if there was one question I could somehow ask Chris, other than why he did anything in general about it, like what was going through his head, it would be, out of everything that you did this weekend, why'd you kill Daniel? Why? Like like Vicky said, Daniel was innocent. There was no reason for you to kill him other than that stupid logic of, well, I don't want to be without his both parents, pal. I don't know, using Vince in that thing, but it's like, really? There was no reason to kill Daniel. I know there's that whole thing that's been talked about on the internet for years that Daniel had some type of learning disorder, whether he was autistic to some degree or some other weird one. I mean, even Jericho commented on it, but then he later redacted that claim when he said he did more research. And they don't even bring that up even as a possibility in the documentary. I don't know if they cut it for time or if it's just something they decided not to put in at all. So I'm going to guess he did not have anything wrong with him. And even his older brother David doesn't even mention anything about that when he talks about Daniel. When he talks about them, he said they were close and that they wanted to be tag team champions. Like, in an alternate world where these did not happen, that would have been an interesting tag team, the Benoit brothers. But like I said, what if? Dangerous thing to think on. It's like he, it's just a selfishness from him. It's like it's one thing to kill Nancy and then kill himself, especially with the son in the house. That's the only thing I could think of why he would want to do that. But still, you could just take Daniel over to a friend's house to come back and then off yourself. And the fact that the only solace I can give in this is that the fact that he did drug Daniel before he killed him. So depending on how much he gave him and how lucid he was, hopefully he did not feel anything, or if he did, it was over like that. And of course, Benoit, when he did kill himself, the whole Google search, see quickest way to break your neck, tying the towel around his neck, attaching it to the lat thing, and then so he died quickly. Which people are going to hate him for the murder. They're going to be like, oh, he killed himself quickly. Because the way they describe how Nancy was brutalized, she did not go quickly unless she lost consciousness from the strangulation. And they mention one fact pretty briefly, excuse me if I can talk, about her having a broken back, and that's not one thing I ever remember hearing about the murders. But considering how strong Benoit was and the fact that he was also apparently on something, I could see that happening, which leads to the next thing I'm going to mention, and that is in the aftermath of this whole case, the whole steroid allegations, people wanting to blame that for it. Now, the initial murder of Nancy, maybe you could pin that on roid rage, but Daniel and Chris himself, no, no, no. Now, I'm not going to say that him being on steroids for a projected period of time had nothing to do with it, but it's not the sole cause. And the reason I say that is because as they lay out in the documentary, that him being on steroids was one point of contention in the marriage. I mean, they show screenshots of text messages between the two, and you read that Nancy was really upset with what Chris was on, and even saying that, the wellness program is a joke, which Jericho and a couple of the other people that used to work for WWE were talking about how it was a stringent policy and all that. But then it's like, if it was a stringent policy, you would not have found the amount of testosterone in Benoit's system as there was. Now, I can tell you, as someone that does go to the gym and has gotten gains, that even just taking supplements that are not steroids but do help with your performance do help. I've never used steroids, and I don't plan on unless it's for actual medical reasons. But with how much of a perfectionist Chris was when it comes to his work, which that's another thing they touch on in this video. I mean, Jericho even mentions how after he blew a couple spots in one of their matches, he found him backstage doing 500 squats just as a self-penance. But as someone who has done gym stuff, it's like, I can kind of see why Chris would still want to do the steroids, even if they're not the best idea, health-wise. If for just image alone, because of how much wrestling was his life. I mean, people's, the whole term vanilla midget that a certain quad terror threw around all those years ago. But even then, look at, maybe on TV compared to some of the bigger guys, he was smaller, but how much he weighed and how tall he was, I would not call him a small man. Because my friend Jeff, about the same size as Benoit, maybe a little bit taller, but weight-wise, also maybe a little bit leaner, but I wouldn't call Jeff a small man. I mean, he's not an overly large man, but he's in pretty good shape and all that. It's like, so who knows the reason why Benoit was still on it other than wanting to make sure he still had that wrestling image. I mean, there might have been other things going on in his head and why he used them, but just, I mean, we didn't see all the text between him and Nancy, so maybe there was more in the argument, but Benoit, I don't think he really needed to use him at that point in his career. If he had lost weight and gotten a little smaller, he still would have been able to go on reputation alone. Probably just that whole Land of the Giants thing in the locker room. Who knows? This is just me speculating on that point. Because they don't really address the whole locker room issue in the documentary, other than, the wellness policy. That's the only thing about that they touched on. And as I mentioned before, the media jumped on the steroids thing like shark on blood. But I think it's a side reason for what happened. I think the main cause, when you combine it with his grief and with the steroids and the strain it put on the marriage and any other outside stresses, was CTE. And which this is the part of the documentary where Christopher Nowinski comes into it and talks about the effects of chair shots to the head and other things on your brain and how Chris's brain was. I mean, there's the whole thing that I don't know if they mentioned it in this wording in the documentary about his brain looking like a 70-year-old Alzheimer's patient. And then they have some of the other wrestlers talk about, the effects of chair shots and all that, and how it was a badge of honor to take an unprotected chair shot. We see some examples. I mean, when I think of unprotected chair shots, I think of that I Quit match between Mankind and The Rock, where Mick took, I don't know, was it like 13 chair shots to the head? It's like, I cannot not even imagine taking one. That's why it's like when they do the whole thing when they put their hand up and then take it, it's like, I mean, it's still bad, but that's smarter. And then, of course, Chavo even wonders what type of CTE he has because of it. Now, the CTE can affect your personality a little bit, can affect your behavior with how they lay it out. And as you can kind of guess from how I led into this whole thing, I think it's a combination of everything. It's mainly CTE, a little bit of a steroid use because it can affect your personality depending on the amount. I've never taken them, so I don't know firsthand. It's just that's where the stereotypical road rage comes from. And then the outside stresses and the grief. It's just all of it. As you guys know, when I've ever talked about nature versus nurture, I think it's usually a little bit of both. That's why I think in this case, one of the catalyst was all the above, but the starting point is CTE. I think if you were to take that out and still have everything else, you might have still had the murders, but you might have also had the chance to where it might not have even happened. It's, like I said, what if? If you still had CT and took out some of the other stuff, might not have happened. Like if Eddie had still been there, murders might not have happened. They don't really speculate about that in the documentary, which probably a good thing because for a documentary like this, it's probably not a good possibility to what if that. I mean, the closest we get to that is Nancy's words. Now, in the aftermath of the Benoit murders, the two that I really feel for are David, the older son, and Sandra, Nancy's sister, because their family was basically gone, taken from them. And as David puts in the documentary, he's kind of shunned by maybe not some of the wrestlers, but by WWE, which I know some people in the wrestling internet community call BS on that. But who knows if that was dramatized for the documentary or it's true. It's one of those things I'm not going to comment on about it. And of course, Nancy not wanting any WWE people at the funeral, which is why when she saw JR, she told him you're not welcome at the wake. She said she could spot a work a mile away. JR said that he felt he was the one person at the funeral who was not, that they didn't want there, which I can kind of see why. But with Sandra and David, if there's any happy note in this documentary, is at the end we actually do get to see them reunited, because in the years since the murders in between from them to the documentary, they never saw each other. They were both under the impression that the other didn't want to see each other, which that makes me wonder, why would you do that? On David's end, I can kind of see why probably his mother told him that, yeah, Sandra doesn't want to see you because of what your dad did to you or her sister. And then on the opposite end, Sandra was probably told, nah, David doesn't want to see you. He doesn't want to see anyone from Nancy's family, which would hurt because the way they bring up the whole family thing, they don't like using the phrase step and all that, which I can understand that because my family has a lot of that in there. I mean, even though my parents never married and there's no blood connection, couple of cousins on my dad's side of the family would still call my grandmother on my mother's side of the family Grandma Sandy. And even though I have no full siblings, unless I have to explain it in depth, we never use that half term when it comes to my siblings. None of them. The only time we ever bring anything up is if there's like an actual step relation there, but even then, it's usually mainly to explain it. So it is happy to see that those two get reunited in the end. The last thing to talk about is the whole Benoit and the Hall of Fame situation and the tribute the night of. The way that they laid out in the documentary, at the time that the bodies were found, the police were already investigating it as a murder-suicide. And they were actually sent there by WWE officials. I kind of knew a little bit of that, but here we actually get to hear the 911 call from the WWE employee to the police department saying they want a safety check done on Benoit. And we actually get the whole lead into that. Apparently, Chavo did not share the text messages with Johnny Ace until after the pay-per-view. He's like, oh, pal, should have told us that ages ago. I'm not going to make fun of Johnny Ace that much with this. So them doing the safety check warranted, because who knows without the safety check how long the bodies would have been laying there. Well, the police did the safety check, and because of how they found everything, investigating it as a murder-suicide right away, they, informed WWE, yeah, Benoit and his family are dead. Now, one thing they don't mention in the program is if they mentioned that they're dead and they're investigating it as a possible murder-suicide, or if they just told WWE that they're dead. If it's the latter, I can understand why WWE would end up doing the tribute for Benoit that night on the 3-hour Raw. Airing clips from Hard Knocks, Chris Benoit story, showing some of his better matches, and having WWE superstars comment on him, which of course led to that very interesting William Regal tribute, where he's the only one that basically says that he's not going to comment too much on the situation, other than saying Benoit was one of the best in-ring workers, which of course we find out later that he lived in Atlanta at the time, so probably knew a little bit more than some of the other wrestlers. And of course led to Chavo, as he stated, how, I mean, they're humanizing a murderer. Now, if they did tell WWE that they were investigating it as a murder-suicide, someone in that office needs to be given a giant putazo. Because it's like, even if it turned out, just for the sake of the argument with this, so don't jump on me, even if it turned out that it was 3 murders across the board, if you're told by the police that they're investigating the deaths as a murder suicide, the last thing you want to do from a PR standpoint is what WWE ended up doing. If I was in charge of the PR thing, I would have said, all right, we're just going to announce that the real life situation, Benoit and his family are gone. And because of that, you're going to, just for taste, you're going to drop the whole Vince McMahon death thing. Maybe not have Vince on Raw that night. Continue to start that story the next week instead. Have maybe have a couple people talk about Benoit, but try to do it in a way to where it's a little bit more tasteful. And then just carry on with Raw per normal. And then maybe have Vince the next night say that they're not ever going to be mentioning Benoit in light of what we found out recently. We are not going to be mentioning Mr. Benoit's name on the program ever again. And just go from there. It would have been better for PR, but nope, because of what they did, they got criticized. Now, the way JR gets on there, he kind of defends it a little bit. That's why I think a little bit more they were told that they were just dead. But this is wrestling, so there could be a work in there somewhere. And as for the whole Hall of Fame thing, I don't think Chris should be in there. I mean, there was a time many years ago, especially right after the murders happened, and a couple of years after that, where I felt that if you were going to put him in the Hall of Fame, you should probably just silently put him in there. Think what they did with Andre, but even silently, or you stick it in, you don't talk about it at all, and you just not talk about it. But now, with the years, with me being able to mull on it more and find out more info about the murders, I'd say nope, shouldn't be in. Now the Hall of Fames he's already in, leave him there. Now the reason I say that is, I got 3 words: O.J. Simpson. Last I checked, OJ's in the Football Hall of Fame. Still has his Heisman Trophy and all that. They didn't strip his accolades from him because of the whole murder thing. I mean, before anyone jumps on, I know he was found not guilty, but that's from a criminal legal standpoint. Remember, he was still found liable criminally, civilly, excuse me, even though there's less things compared to criminal and you don't have to have a unanimous verdict. You gotta throw that in too. But even just from the whole controversy, he's still in the Hall of Fame, still has his accolades. I mean, not physically. I mean, wasn't his Heisman Trophy one of the items he stole back in Vegas? But if it was a situation like that where he was already in, like, keep him in. I think it was the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame or one of the other magazine Hall of Fames where they did do the vote in the year or so after the murders to see if they wanted him out, and it was a very narrow margin that they kept him in. So it's something like that. Since he did it, he doesn't deserve to be inducted because of the controversy. If he was already in, keep him in. He has a Hall of Fame worthy career, but because of what happened, doesn't deserve to go in. Nancy, just from her contribution to wrestling valet, because when they talk about her relationship with Sullivan, they do go into her whole valet career and how she revolutionized it for women. Yeah, she deserves to go in, but because of her connection to Chris, you can't, at least for the WWE Hall of Fame. Other Hall of Fames, not so much. But for the WWE Hall of Fame, you can't include her in without also Chris coming up, no matter how you try to hide it. I mean, you can edit around it all you want, like they do with the matches that they have to highlight when it comes to other wrestlers that are involved in them, like the first Money in the Bank and some other matches where they can edit around Benoit or show him but don't focus on him. But with Nancy, especially for the WCW stuff, it's harder to edit around the later stuff since it's connected to Chris. The earlier stuff, yes. But it's just not going to happen. The documentary definitely gets my stamp of approval. You guys should all watch it. I'm going to include the link in the description where you can watch it because Vice uploaded both episodes onto their YouTube channel. That's where I watched it. In case anyone's wondering, yes, I did watch the episodes on New Jack and the Brawl for All. All I'm going to say about those episodes is that the New Jack one, I thought New Jack was crazy before, but having watched this, I think he's even crazier and he should be blackballed from the business. Oh, I had a tough childhood. Doesn't give you carte blanche to attack a senior wrestler with a baseball bat, or pull a knife from your pocket and gut a guy just because he's being a little stiff with you, or throw a guy off the scaffold just because of how the finish to a previous match went. And as for the Brawl for All one, a lot of this info I'd heard before, but it just shows just more how deluded Russo is with his thinking and when it comes to the wrestling business. And he's another guy that should be blackballed. I think he kind of already is unofficially, but he should be surely blackballed. Bro. And also just shows how ridiculous that concept was. Oh, we're going to have in a work environment, we're going to have a shoot.